Eleanor Thornton pressed her spine against the adobe wall of her ranch house. James's Winchester trembling in her grip as 5 shadows circled through the Arizona darkness. 3 weeks ago, she'd buried her husband. 2 weeks ago, her father. Yesterday, she'd discovered the truth. James didn't die from fever, he was poisoned. And the men surrounding her home tonight were the killers come to finish what they started. She had 2 choices: run and lose everything her family died protecting, or make her stand alone against impossible odds. Either way, by sunrise, nothing would ever be the same. Thank you for joining Eleanor's story. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, please comment your city below so I can see how far this tale travels. And if you stay until the end, you'll witness how one woman's darkest hour became the beginning of something extraordinary. Don't forget to like and subscribe to follow more stories on our channel. Now let's begin. He poisoned my husband. Widow faces 5 killers. U.S. Marshal arrives with shocking truth. The Arizona territory stretched endless and merciless beneath a sky promising no mercy. Eleanor Thornton stood at her bedroom window watching dust devils spiral across land that had cost her everything worth having. The ranch sprawled below 200 acres of hard-won territory, a main house built from adobe and desperate hope, a barn that still smelled of her father's tobacco corrals that James had mended every spring with his own calloused hands. All of it tainted now, all of it stained with death and lies. She turned from the window, surveying scattered belongings that represented 28 years of life. A carpet bag lay open on the bed, half packed with whatever she could carry. Her mother's cameo brooch, 2 dresses, a tintype of James on their wedding day, his face solemn beneath an unfamiliar hat, her own expression caught between fear and determination. That girl in the photograph seemed like a stranger now. "You can't just leave it all, Ellie." Her father's voice echoed through memory, spoken just days before the fever took him. He'd gripped her hand with strength that belied his dying body, his eyes fierce even as his skin burned with illness. "This land, your grandfather homesteaded this land. James gave his life defending it. You can't let them win." But they'd already won, hadn't they? The sickness had seen to that. Or had it? Eleanor moved to the dresser, pulling out the worn leather journal she'd found hidden beneath James's side of the mattress 3 days ago. Her hands shook as she opened it to the page she'd read and reread until the words burned into her mind. October 12th, 1884, the medicine Dr. Finch prescribed tastes bitter metallic like pennies on the tongue. "Ellie insists I take it, says it will help the fever. But I feel worse with each dose. Weaker. My hands shake. Last night I woke vomiting blood. I saw Garrett Kane in town today." He smiled at me. The smile of a man who knows something I don't. "If anything happens to me, Ellie needs to know Dr. Finch is not what he seems. Neither is Kane. The land, the entry ended there." James had died 2 days later. Eleanor's fingers traced the jagged handwriting, so different from James's usual careful script. The handwriting of a man losing control of his own body. Arsenic poisoning. She'd looked it up in her father's medical encyclopedia. The symptoms matched perfectly: metallic tasty, weakness, vomiting blood, trembling hands. James hadn't died of fever. He'd been murdered, and she knew exactly who'd done it. A sound outside froze her mid-thought. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses approaching fast. Her heart lurched. Too soon. They weren't supposed to come back yet. She planned to leave tomorrow before dawn, taking only what she could carry and abandoning the rest to whoever wanted it. But time, like everything else, had run out. Eleanor grabbed the Winchester, her hand steadier than she'd expected. She moved through the house, extinguishing lamps, pulling curtains. Through a gap in the fabric, she watched 5 riders materialize from the dusk, their silhouettes dark against the dying light. Garrett Kane rode in front, easy in the saddle, a man who'd never known real fear. His companions spread out surrounding the house with practiced efficiency. They'd done this before. Would do it again. "Mrs. Thornton," Kane's voice carried across the yard, friendly and terrible. "No need for alarm. Just came by to check on you, see if you'd reconsidered our offer." Eleanor pressed against the wall beside the window, the rifle barrel cold against her cheek. Her breath came shallow and quick. She forced herself to slow it, to think. 5 men. One of her. No chance of winning a straight fight. "I know you're in there, Eleanor." The false friendliness dropped from Kane's voice. "Saw you in town yesterday coming out of that fancy doctor's office. You look tired, scared. This is hard country for a woman alone. Why make it harder? One of his men laughed a sound like gravel scraping metal. We could make it real easy, another voice called out. Quick sale, quick cash. Everybody walks away happy. Or, Kane said, his tone shifting to something darker, we could make it difficult. Accidents happen out here. Houses burn. Women disappear. Such a shame when grief drives someone to desperate acts. Eleanor's finger found the trigger. She could shoot him. One bullet right through the window. But then what? His men would kill her. The ranch would still be lauded. Her death would mean nothing unless... I'm giving you one more chance, Eleanor, Kane continued. Come out. We'll talk like civilized people. Sign some papers. By tomorrow, you'll be on a stage to somewhere better than this godforsaken territory. Somewhere you belong. The words hit like fists. Somewhere you belong. As if she didn't belong here on land her family had bled for. As if being a woman alone meant she had no right to stand her ground. Something hardened in Eleanor's chest, a crystallization of grief and rage and exhaustion into something sharp and unbreakable. She had James's journal. She had proof of murder. If she was going to die tonight, she'd make damn sure Kane didn't get away with it. Eleanor moved to the back door, slipping out into the darkness. The desert night was cool against her skin as she ran, crouched low toward the rocky outcropping 200 yards from the house. Her father had shown her the hiding spot when she was 10, a natural cave barely visible from the ground, perfect for storing valuables during Apache raids. She'd hidden the journal there this morning, wrapped in oilcloth. Behind her, she heard Kane's patience snap. Burn it! Burn the whole damn thing down! Eleanor's breath caught. They were going to gunfire erupted from 3 directions at once. She threw herself flat against the rocks, hard hammering as muzzle flashes lit the darkness like lightning. But the shots weren't aimed at the house. They were aimed at Kane's men. U.S. Marshals. Drop your weapons. Hands up. The voice that cut through the chaos was deep, commanding, edged with violence barely leashed. Eleanor peered around the rock and saw 2 figures moving with lethal precision. One from the barn, one from the bunkhouse, cutting down Kane's men with surgical accuracy. One of the outlaws fell, then another. Kane shouted something, wheeling his horse toward the desert. The remaining 2 men followed, firing wildly behind them as they fled into darkness. Silence crashed down, broken only by harsh breathing and the crackle of dropped torches burning themselves out in the dirt. Eleanor stayed frozen, a rifle raised, watching as the 2 figures emerged into moonlight. The first was older, mid-40s maybe, with weathered features and eyes the color of winter sky. He moved like a man intimately familiar with violence, checking the fallen outlaws with efficient brutality. A marshal's badge glinted at his chest. The second was younger, perhaps early 30s, with the same pale eyes but a softer expression. Brothers, Eleanor thought. The resemblance was too strong to be coincidence. Clear, the younger one called out. The older marshal holstered his weapon, those winter eyes scanning the darkness until they found Eleanor's hiding spot. Mrs. Thornton, he said, his voice gentler than she'd expected. You can come out. It's safe now. Safe. The word felt foreign, impossible. Eleanor stood slowly, the Winchester still raised, and stepped into the light. The older marshal's eyes widened slightly as he took her in dusty dress, bare feet, rifle held with the confidence of someone who knew how to use it. My name is Marcus Donovan, he said, touching the brim of his hat. U.S. Marshal. This is my brother Samuel. We've been tracking Garrett Kane for 4 months, across 3 territories. You're late, Eleanor said, her voice steadier than she felt. He murdered my husband 2 weeks ago. Something shifted in Marcus Donovan's expression, surprise giving way to something harder, darker. Tell me everything, he said. They sat at Eleanor's kitchen table as false dawn painted the sky gray. Samuel had checked the fallen outlaws, both dead, neither one Garrett Kane. The ranch was secure for now, but Kane was still out there, wounded and dangerous. Marcus listened as Eleanor told her story, his weathered face revealing nothing. But his hands wrapped around a coffee cup tightened with each detail she shared about James's death, Dr. Finch's medicine, Kane's threats. When she finished, Marcus set his cup down carefully. Your husband sent me a letter, he said quietly, 3 weeks ago. It arrived at the territorial office in Santa Fe 2 days after I'd left on another case. By the time I got it, he didn't finish. Didn't need to. Eleanor felt something cold settle in her chest. He asked for help. He said someone was trying to kill him for the land. that he'd discovered corruption in the local government, the doctor, the bank, maybe even the sheriff. He asked me to come to Arizona to investigate. Marcus's jaw tightened. I didn't get here in time. The guilt in his voice was palpable raw. Why you, Eleanor asked. Why did James write to you specifically? Marcus was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. 20 years ago, I was a deputy in Kansas. A woman named Catherine Miller ran a small farm outside Abilene. She was being harassed by a land speculator named Vernon Cross, same pattern as Cain. Threats, intimidation, violence. Catherine asked for help. He paused, staring into his coffee like it held answers. I told her there wasn't enough evidence for an arrest. Told her to sell and move on. She refused. His hands trembled slightly. Cross killed her 3 days later. Burned her alive in her own home. Eleanor's breath caught. I've spent 20 years trying to make up for that failure, Marcus continued. Your husband knew my reputation, the Marshal who doesn't let land thieves walk away. He thought I could save him. But you didn't, Eleanor said quietly. No, I didn't. Marcus finally met her eyes. But I can save you, and I can make sure Cain answers for what he's done. Samuel spoke up for the first time, his voice warmer than his brother's. We need your help, Mrs. Thornton. Cain will come back. He's too invested in this land to walk away now. If we set a trap, use your ranch as bait, we can end this. Eleanor looked between the two brothers. She thought of James's journal hidden in the rocks. Thought of her father's dying words. Thought of that girl in the wedding tintype, the one who'd been brave enough to leave everything familiar for a chance at something better. That girl deserved more than to run now. What would I have to do? Eleanor asked. They spent the day preparing. Marcus and Samuel moved with practiced efficiency, positioning themselves in the barn and bunkhouse, testing sight lines, arranging cover. They'd done this before, turned civilian spaces into battlefields. Your husband built well, Marcus said, examining the thick adobe walls. Good sight lines, strong structure. These walls will stop most rifle rounds. Eleanor watched him work, noting the way he moved, economical, precise, wasting no motion. This was a man who'd spent decades learning violence, turning it into a cold science. Can I ask you something? She said. Marcus paused, a hammer in hand. Yes. The woman in Kansas, Catherine Miller. You cared about her. It wasn't a question. Marcus set the hammer down slowly. I was engaged to her, he said quietly. We were going to be married that fall. I told her to give up the farm because I wanted her safe, wanted to start our life together somewhere away from Vernon Cross. But she wouldn't leave. She said the farm was her father's legacy, that running would dishonor his memory. I called her stubborn, foolish. His voice roughened. I told her she had to choose the farm or me. She chose the farm. She chose her principles, her integrity. And I was too angry, too proud to see that she was right. Marcus looked at Eleanor directly. When Cross killed her, I hunted him for 6 months. Found him in Oklahoma territory. He drew on me. I was faster. Eleanor understood what he wasn't saying. Marcus Donovan had killed the man who murdered his fiancée. Had spent 20 years trying to redeem that one failure to save other stubborn women who wouldn't abandon what they loved. I'm not Catherine Miller, Eleanor said carefully. No, Marcus agreed, you're alive. And if I have anything to say about it, you'll stay that way. As dusk fell, they reviewed the plan one final time. Eleanor's role was simple: be visible in the house as evening fell, light a lamp in the window, let herself be bait. Everything in her rebelled against it, against the passivity. The trust required the surrender of control, but she'd chosen this path. One more thing, Marcus said, pulling a folded paper from his saddlebag. If this goes bad, if we don't make it, you get to town and give this to any lawman you find. It's a full report on Cain's gang everywhere. They've hit everyone they've killed. Make sure it gets to the right people. Eleanor took the paper, its weight in her hands suddenly enormous. You think it will go bad? Marcus's expression softened almost imperceptibly. I think we're outnumbered in dealing with men who've got nothing to lose. But I also think we're better, faster, and smarter than they are. Odds are good, Mrs. Thornton, just not certain. Nothing's certain, Eleanor said quietly. No, ma'am, it's not. He held her gaze for a moment longer, something unspoken passing between them. Recognition, maybe, of shared understanding. They were both people who'd lost too much, who carried grief like stones in their pockets. But they were still here, still fighting. That had to count for something. Full dark came slowly, the sky bleeding through purple and indigo before surrendering to black. Eleanor lit the lamp as instructed, placing it in the front window where it would be visible from the approach. She moved through the house, performing ordinary tasks, washing dishes, straightening furniture, trying to appear like a woman alone preparing for a siege. But her awareness tracked outward to where Marcus and Samuel waited in the darkness. She couldn't see them, couldn't hear them, but knowing they were there changed everything. An hour passed, then another. Eleanor's nerves stretched tighter with each minute of silence. Maybe Cain wouldn't come. Maybe he'd changed his mind, moved on to easier prey. Then she heard it, hoofbeats. Multiple horses moving fast. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. Eleanor moved to her designated position, an interior room with thick walls away from windows and doors. Through a crack in the door, she watched three dark shapes materialize from the night. Only three. Cain and two others. They'd lost men in last night's fight. Now they were cautious, wary. Eleanor Thornton, Cain's voice boomed across the yard, but there was a new edge to it, pain maybe, or fear. I know those marshals are here. I know you're working with them. Eleanor said nothing, following Marcus's instructions. Make them commit. Make them come to you. You killed two of my men, Cain continued. Killed them on your property. That makes you just as guilty as those badge-wearing bastards. The law won't protect you now, Eleanor. You're a murderer, same as me. She's not the murderer here, Cain. Marcus's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. We know about Dr. Finch. We know about the arsenic. James Thornton died because you wanted his land. Silence. Then Cain laughed, a sound without humor. James Thornton died because this land belongs to my family. His grandfather stole it from mine 60 years ago. Eleanor's breath caught. What? My father died in prison, Cain shouted. Died after losing everything he owned because Samuel Thornton accused him of cattle theft. It was a lie, and all of it was lies to steal our land. Marcus's voice stayed calm. Then take it to court, file a claim. Don't murder innocent people. The court, Cain spat. The same court that believes Samuel Thornton's lies. The same judges and sheriffs in his pocket. There is no justice in Arizona, Marshal. Only who's willing to fight hardest for what's theirs. Then let's fight, Marcus said quietly. You and me, no more innocents dying. Noble, Cain said, but stupid. Gunfire erupted, but this time it came from behind Eleanor from inside the house. She spun, rifle raised, as a window shattered and a figure tumbled through, landing hard on the floor. Dr. Lawrence Finch, the man who'd poisoned James, he raised his pistol toward Eleanor's chest. She fired. The Winchester's recoil slammed into her shoulder. Finch's pistol clattered across the floor, his body crumpling backward. Eleanor stood, frozen smoke curling from her rifle barrel, ears ringing. She'd just shot a man. The second time in 2 days she'd ended a human life. Outside, the battle raged. Through the broken window, she saw Marcus and Samuel exchanging fire with Cain and his men. One of the outlaws fell, then the other. Cain stood alone now, bleeding from his shoulder, surrounded. Drop it, Cain, Marcus ordered, stepping into the open. Cain's gun wavered. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might surrender. Then he smiled, that same cold smile James had written about in his journal. You want the truth, Marshal, Cain said. I'll give you the truth. He reached into his coat. Marcus fired twice. Garrett Cain fell, his hands still reaching for whatever he'd meant to show them. Eleanor found herself moving, without thinking, running through the shattered window across the bullet-scarred yard. Cain lay gasping, blood spreading across his chest. In his hand, he clutched a yellowed piece of paper. Marcus knelt beside him, gently extracting the document. His expression shifted as he read it, surprise giving way to something darker. What is it? Eleanor asked. Marcus handed her the paper without a word. It was a deed, a legal deed to 200 acres of Arizona territory dated 1824, made out to Patrick Cain, Garrett Cain's grandfather. Eleanor's world tilted. But my grandfather homesteaded this land in 1869. It was unclaimed. Because my grandfather died in prison, Cain whispered, blood bubbling at his lips. Died before he could defend his claim. Your grandfather knew. He took advantage. Took everything. That doesn't excuse murder. Marcus said quietly. No, Kane agreed, his voice fading, but neither does it excuse theft. He died with his eyes open, staring at the sky that had witnessed generations of violence over this hard, unforgiving land. Dawn came slowly, painting the desert in shades of rose and gold. Eleanor sat on her porch steps, James's journal in one hand, the Kane family deed in the other. Samuel was inside, bandaging a graze wound on his arm. Marcus stood a few yards away, giving her space. What happens now? Eleanor asked. Marcus turned to face her. We file reports. The territorial court will investigate both the murders and the land claim. It's possible, he hesitated. It's possible Kane's family has a legal right to this property. Eleanor had suspected as much. She looked out at the land her grandfather had built, that her father had maintained, that James had died defending. Land that might belong to someone else entirely. I don't know if I can keep fighting, she admitted. Every time I think I understand what's right, what's true, something else breaks. James is dead. My father is dead. Garrett Kane is dead. And for what? Dirt and grudges that go back before any of us were born. Marcus sat beside her on the steps, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Can I tell you something Catherine Miller said to me? He asked. Right before I left Kansas. Eleanor nodded. She said some things are worth dying for, but everything is worth living for. The question is whether you have the courage to choose life when in death it seems easier. What did she mean? I didn't understand then, but I think, Marcus paused, choosing words carefully. I think she meant that giving up isn't the same as letting go. Giving up is surrender. Letting go is choosing a different kind of fight. Eleanor turned to look at him, really look at him. This weathered man who'd carried guilt for 20 years, who'd spent 2 decades chasing outlaws to atone for one failure. What would letting go look like? She asked. Maybe accepting that the land itself doesn't matter as much as what you do with it. Whether you stay or sell, whether the court rules for you or against you, you survived. You fought. You didn't let grief make you weak. His pale eyes held hers. That's worth something. It's worth everything. They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill. Inside, Samuel started making coffee, the domestic sound incongruous against the backdrop of violence. The territorial office is sending someone to assess the land claim, Marcus said eventually. Could take months, maybe years. In the meantime, you're free to stay, run the ranch, build a life. Alone. Marcus's jaw tightened. I'm requesting reassignment to Arizona territory. If it's approved, I'll be stationed in Prescott, covering this region. I'll be around. Eleanor's heart stuttered. Why? Because I made a promise to your husband that I'd keep you safe, and I keep my promises. He paused. And because I'd like the chance to know you better. When we're not shooting at outlaws. Despite everything, the death, the grief, the revelations, Eleanor felt something warm unfurl in her chest. I'd like that too, she said quietly. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of bureaucracy and waiting. Marcus and Samuel transported the bodies to town Cane Finch and the 2 fallen outlaws. The territorial marshal's office sent investigators. Eleanor gave her statement 3 times each, retelling, scraping her raw. The land claim became a legal tangle. The court appointed a surveyor to verify boundaries, a historian to trace ownership records, a judge to sort through decades of conflicting documentation. Patrick Kane's deed was authentic, dated 1824, but Samuel Thornton's homestead claim from 1869 was also legal, filed when the land had been officially designated as unclaimed federal territory. Someone was lying, or someone had made a terrible mistake. Either way, Eleanor's life hung suspended between past and future, unable to move forward until the truth emerged. Could take a year, the territorial judge told her, a sympathetic man named Harlan Webster. Maybe more. These historical claims are complicated. What am I supposed to do in the meantime? Eleanor asked. Live, Judge Webster said simply. The court won't evict you during the investigation. Run your ranch, build your life. When we reach a decision, we'll notify you. So she did. Marcus's reassignment came through in early November. He rode to Eleanor's ranch on a cold morning, his breath frosting in the air, to deliver the news in person. Prescott office, he said, standing on her porch with his hat in his hands like a nervous schoolboy. I'll be covering 8 settlements and about 40 ranches across 200 miles. Circuit riding 2 weeks on the road, a few days in town, then back out. When do you start? Tomorrow. Eleanor's chest tightened. She'd grown accustomed to his presence these past weeks. The quiet competence, the way he fixed things without being asked, the conversations that stretched late into the evening beside her fireplace. I'll come through here regularly, Marcus continued, his voice carefully neutral. Every 2 weeks, give or take. Check on you, make sure you're safe. I can take care of myself, Eleanor said, but the words lacked heat. I know. His pale eyes held hers. But I'd like to check anyway, if that's all right with you. What could she say? That she'd miss him, that the ranch felt less empty when he was here, that some nights she lay awake wondering what it would be like if he stayed. That's all right with me, she said quietly. Marcus nodded, settling his hat back on his head. He started to turn away, then stopped. Eleanor, he said, her name soft in his mouth. What we talked about, getting to know each other when we're not shooting at outlaws. I meant that. So did I. Good. He smiled, then a rare expression that transformed his weathered face. I'll see you in 2 weeks. She watched him ride away until he disappeared into the desert haze, already counting the days until he'd return. Samuel left for Santa Fe 3 days later. His wound had healed cleanly and his mind was made up. He was retiring from federal service to marry Maria Chavez, the widow he'd been corresponding with for 8 months. You're giving up everything you know, Eleanor said, as she helped him pack. No, Samuel corrected gently. I'm choosing something better. Marcus and I, we've been running from grief our whole lives. Chasing outlaws, living out of saddlebags, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. He folded a shirt with careful precision. I'm 32 years old. I'm tired of running. Does Marcus know that you're quitting because you're tired? Marcus knows. Samuel's expression softened. He's happy for me. Jealous maybe, but happy. He wants me to have what he couldn't have with Catherine. He told you about her. He tells me everything. We're all each other has had for 20 years. Samuel closed his saddlebag, then turned to face her fully. That's changing now. For both of us. Eleanor understood what he wasn't saying. I'm not trying to replace her. I know, and Marcus knows that too. But Eleanor, he's falling in love with you. Has been since the night you shot Kane's man and didn't flinch. Since you sat on your porch with a land deed that might make you homeless and still chose to fight rather than run. The words hit her like a physical blow. He barely knows me. He knows enough. The question is, do you feel the same? Eleanor opened her mouth to deny it, but the lie wouldn't come. Because somewhere between the gunfight and the grief, between long evenings of conversation and quiet mornings of shared coffee, she'd started feeling something she hadn't expected to feel again after James. I don't know what I feel, she admitted. James has only been gone 2 months. I'm still grieving him. Still angry at him for dying, for writing to Marcus too late, for keeping secrets about the land. It feels wrong to be alive, Samuel interrupted gently, to want something beyond survival. Yes. Catherine Miller told Marcus the same thing you know, that some things are worth dying for, but everything is worth living for. She was right. James would want you to live, Eleanor. Not just exist, but live. He left the next morning with a hug that lingered, a promise to visit when he could, and a final piece of advice. Don't make my brother work too hard for it. He's old and stubborn, but he's got a good heart. Eleanor stood on her porch watching another man ride away and wondered if she'd ever stop saying goodbye. Winter settled over Arizona with surprising gentleness. The days stayed warm enough for work, the nights cold enough to need a fire. Eleanor hired Samuel Morrison, Jack's 18-year-old son, to help with heavy labor twice a week. She bought 6 head of cattle with money from the reward on Kane's gang, modest breeding stock that would form the foundation of a proper herd. The ranch slowly came back to life, and every 2 weeks, like clockwork, Marcus Donovan rode in. The first few visits were professional, checking the property line, making sure no other land speculators had come sniffing around, filing reports with the territorial office about the ongoing investigation. But gradually the pretense fell away. He'd arrive in late afternoon, help with whatever work needed doing, mending fence, fixing a broken water pump, reinforcing the barn door that winter winds had damaged. They'd share dinner, sit in across from each other at the kitchen table that had once held James and her father talking about everything and nothing. Tell me about Kansas, Eleanor said one evening in December after Marcus had spent the day helping her slaughter a pig for winter provisions. He was quiet for a long moment, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, firelight playing across his weathered features. Kansas was flat, he finally said. So flat you could see weather coming from miles away. Storms that turned the whole sky green before the tornadoes dropped. Winters that froze cattle standing up. Summers that baked the earth until it cracked. Sounds terrible. It was beautiful, Marcus corrected softly. In its own harsh way, my parents had a quarter-section homestead outside Abilene. My father grew wheat. My mother kept chickens and a vegetable garden. Samuel and I, we had chores from sunrise to sunset, but we were happy. What changed? Cholera, summer of 1864. It swept through like wildfire, killed half the town in 3 weeks. My parents lasted 4 days after they got sick. His voice stayed level, but his knuckles were white around the cup. Samuel was 12. I was 15. We buried them ourselves because the undertaker was already dead. Eleanor's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Catherine's family took us in. Her father ran the general store in town. She was 17, pretty kind. She read poetry and could outshoot most men I knew. I fell in love with her the first week. What happened to the homestead? We sold it, used the money to pay off my parents' debts. There was nothing left after that. Marcus finally looked up, meeting her eyes. I became a deputy at 18 because it was the only job I could get that paid enough to support Samuel. Turned out I was good at it, tracking, shooting, reading people. Moved up to federal marshal by 23. And Catherine waited. She said she'd wait forever if that's what it took. Pain flickered across his face. I should have married her when I had the chance. Should have quit the marshals, taken a safe job, given her the life she deserved. She didn't want a safe life, Eleanor said quietly. She wanted you. She wanted me to be someone I wasn't ready to be. Someone who could put family before duty, who could walk away from a fight instead of running toward it. Marcus set his cup down with careful precision. By the time I learned that lesson, she was dead. Eleanor reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. You're learning it now. His fingers tightened around hers, warmth spreading through the simple contact. Am I? He asked. You requested reassignment to Arizona. You come here every 2 weeks, even when you don't need to. You've spent 3 hours today teaching me how to properly cure bacon because you noticed I was doing it wrong. That's not a man running toward a fight. That's a man trying to build something. Marcus turned his hand over palm to palm, their fingers interlacing. What if I'm too late again? What if the court rules against you and you lose everything? What if I can't protect you the way I couldn't protect her? Then we'll face it together, Eleanor said. And if we lose, we'll start over somewhere else. But Marcus, I'm not Catherine. I'm not going to die defending this land if it means leaving you behind. Something in his expression cracked open, vulnerable and raw. You mean that? I mean it. He stood slowly, drawing her up with him until they stood facing each other in the firelight. His free hand rose to cup her cheek, thumb, brushing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. I'm falling in love with you, he said quietly. I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving, James. But Eleanor, I can't keep pretending this is just professional courtesy. Can't keep lying to myself that I come here for any reason except that being near you makes me feel less broken. Eleanor's breath caught. She should say this was too fast. Should remind him she was a widow of barely 3 months. Should maintain proper mourning protocol. But she was so tired of should. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered. Marcus kissed her, then soft and careful, like she was something precious that might shatter. Eleanor melted into him, letting herself feel something besides grief for the first time since James died. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. I have to leave tomorrow, he said. Finish my circuit, but I'll be back in 2 weeks, and Eleanor, when I come back, I want to court you properly. If you'll let me. I'll let you, she said. That night, Eleanor lay in bed alone, fingers touching her lips where Marcus had kissed her, and let herself imagine a future that didn't revolve around death and grief. Christmas came quietly. Marcus spent 3 days at the ranch, helping Eleanor prepare a modest celebration. They roasted a chicken, made dried apple pie from her fall harvest, sat by the fire exchanging small gifts, a book of poetry for her, a new hunting knife for him. I haven't celebrated Christmas in years, Marcus admitted. Samuel and I were usually on the trail eating hardtack and jerky, tracking some outlaw who didn't care about holidays. Do you miss it, the work? Sometimes. There's a clarity to it. Good guys, bad guys, justice served. Real life is messier. Is it strange, Eleanor asked, being in one place, coming back to the same house instead of moving on? Marcus considered the question seriously. Terrifying, he said. Every time I ride away from here, I'm afraid something will happen before I get back. That Kane had other partners. That you'll change your mind about us. That the court will rule and you'll be gone. I'm not going anywhere. You don't know that? No, Eleanor agreed, but I choose to believe it anyway. As winter deepened into January, their relationship developed its own rhythm. Marcus would arrive every 2 weeks, stay for 2 or 3 days, then ride on to complete his circuit. During his absences, Eleanor ran the ranch with increasing competence, her confidence growing with each challenge she overcame. She was learning that she didn't need a man to survive, but she wanted Marcus in her life. There was a difference. One cold February morning, Eleanor woke up nauseous. She barely made it to the basin before vomiting violently, her whole body shaking. Food poisoning, she thought, or stomach flu. But when it happened again the next day and the day after that, a different possibility occurred to her. With trembling hands, she counted backward through her calendar. Her last monthly bleeding had been October, 4 months ago, right before James died. Eleanor sat down hard on her bed, one hand pressed to her still, flat stomach. Mind reeling. She was pregnant with James's child, the baby she and James had hoped for, prayed for during 7 years of marriage. The child that had never come, that they'd mourned in quiet, private ways. Now when James was gone and Eleanor was building a new life with Marcus, the baby had finally decided to make itself known. She should feel joy, should feel blessed. Instead, she felt terrified. How would she tell Marcus? They'd been courting for barely 2 months. He was falling in love with her, yes, but falling in love with a widow was different from raising another man's child. What if this changed everything? What if he pulled away, decided it was too complicated? Eleanor spent 3 days wrestling with the question, morning sickness, making her miserable, fear making it worse. When Marcus arrived for his scheduled visit, she was pale and drawn dark circles under her eyes. "You're sick," he said, immediately, concern sharp in his voice. "Have you seen a doctor?" "I don't need a doctor." "Eleanor, I'm pregnant," she blurted out. 4 months along, James's child. Marcus froze, his expression unreadable. Eleanor's heart sank. "Say something," she whispered. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "Is the baby all right?" Of all the responses she'd imagined, genuine concern for her welfare hadn't been the first. "I'm fine, just morning sickness." "Have you been eating enough?" "Getting enough rest. You shouldn't be doing heavy work in your condition." "Marcus," she cut him off, needing to know, "does this change things between us?" He looked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "Change things how?" "You're courting me, but now there's a baby, another man's baby. I'll be a mother by summer. That's a lot to ask someone to take on." Marcus closed the distance between them in 3 strides, taking her face in his hands. "Eleanor, I loved Catherine for 10 years. She died before we could have children. I spent 20 years convinced I'd never have a family." His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. "You're offering me not just a wife, but a child. A ready-made family. That doesn't change things. That makes everything better." Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks. "You mean that?" "I've never meant anything more in my life." He pulled her against his chest, holding her tight. "This baby is a gift. Part of you, part of the man you loved. I'd be honored to help raise them." Eleanor broke then, sobbing into his shirt, relief and fear and hormones and all tangled together. Marcus held her through it, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring reassurances. "We'll figure it out," he said. "Together. You're not alone in this." That night they sat on the porch. Despite the cold, Eleanor wrapped in blankets, Marcus's arm around her shoulders. "I want to marry you," he said quietly, "before the baby comes. I want them to have my name, my protection. I want to be their father in every way that matters." "People will talk," Eleanor warned. "James died in October. If we marry now and I'm already showing..." "Let them talk. I don't give a damn what people think." What about the land claim if the court rules against me? Then we'll start over somewhere else. Build a new ranch, a new life. But Eleanor, I'm not waiting anymore. I've wasted too much of my life being cautious, putting duty before love. I won't make that mistake again. Eleanor turned to look at him, this weathered man who'd carried guilt for 20 years, who'd finally decided to choose life over penance. Ask me, she said. Marcus pulled a small box from his pocket, the same box he'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Inside was a simple gold band, worn smooth by time. This was my mother's wedding ring, he said, the only thing I have from her. I'm asking you to wear it to marry me, to build a life together, you, me, and this baby. I'm asking you to let me be the man I should have been 20 years ago. Eleanor took the ring, feeling its weight, its history. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting all these years to find its rightful place. They married 2 weeks later in the small church in town, with Judge Webster presiding and Samuel arriving from Santa Fe to stand as witness. Eleanor wore her mother's wedding dress, let out slightly, to accommodate her growing belly. Marcus wore his best suit, his Marshal's badge pinned to his chest. The ceremony was simple, their vows sincere. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus kissed her with a tenderness that made Eleanor's knees weak. I love you, he whispered against her lips. I love you too. They spent their wedding night at the ranch in the bed Eleanor had once shared with James. It should have felt wrong, but it didn't. This was a new beginning, a new chapter. Marcus made love to her with reverent care, mindful of the baby, mindful of her grief, mindful of the sacred trust she'd placed in him. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt in months. Peace. Spring arrived with unseasonable warmth. Eleanor's belly swelled as the land bloomed. Marcus rearranged his circuit schedule, staying closer to home as her due date approached. I should be here when the baby comes, he said firmly when Eleanor protested that he was neglecting his duties. The territorial marshal will understand. I don't care if he doesn't. You're my priority now. In late April, on a morning when thunderheads built on the horizon, a stranger arrived at the ranch. Eleanor was hanging laundry, 6 months pregnant and ungainly, when she heard the wagon approach. Marcus was in the barn repairing a stall. Samuel Morrison had left an hour ago after helping with the morning chores. The woman who climbed down from the wagon was perhaps 50, dressed in severe black, her face lined with grief and determination. Mrs. Donovan, she asked. Yes. My name is Constance Finch. I was Lawrence Finch's wife. Eleanor's hand went instinctively to her belly protective. Marcus emerged from the barn, hand near his gun. What do you want? He asked, his voice cold. Constance Finch held up both hands, showing she was unarmed. Peace, answers. Justice for the dead, all the dead, not just yours. Your husband murdered mine, Eleanor said flatly. Poisoned him on Garrett Kane's orders. I know, Constance's voice broke. I know what Lawrence did, and I've spent 4 months trying to understand why. Trying to find something in his papers, his journals, anything that would explain how the man I married could become a killer. She pulled a leather satchel from the wagon, holding it out. I found this hidden in his study. Letters, deeds, a confession he never meant anyone to see. I think you need to read it. Marcus took the satchel, opened it cautiously. Inside were dozens of documents, yellowed with age, written in spidery handwriting. Eleanor watched his face as he read, saw shock give way to disbelief. What is it? She asked. Marcus looked up, his pale eyes wide. It's the truth. The whole truth about this land. They sat at Eleanor's kitchen table, Eleanor, Marcus, and Constance Finch, as Marcus read aloud from the documents. The story they told was complex, spanning 60 years and 3 generations. In 1824, Patrick Kane had indeed held a legal deed to this land, but he'd obtained it through fraud, bribing a territorial surveyor to falsify boundary markers claiming acreage that actually belonged to the Apache tribe. When the fraud was discovered in 1830, Patrick Kane's deed was voided. The land reverted to federal territory. But Patrick Kane had a son, Garrett's father, Michael Kane. Michael grew up believing his family had been robbed of their rightful property. He spent years trying to reclaim it through legal channels, failing at every turn. In 1868, Michael Kane learned that the land was about to be opened for homesteading. He rushed to file a claim, but Samuel Thornton, Eleanor's grandfather, filed one day earlier. Enraged, Michael Caine accused Samuel of cattle theft, testifying falsely in court. Samuel was acquitted, but the scandal ruined his reputation. In revenge, Samuel used his connections to have Michael Caine arrested for perjury. Michael Caine died in prison in 1870. His son Garrett inherited nothing but rage and a forged deed that his father had created, backdating it to make it look authentic. Garrett Caine didn't know the original deed was fraudulent, Constance said quietly. He genuinely believed your grandfather stole his family's land. That's why he was willing to kill for it. He thought he was serving justice. And my husband, Eleanor's voice was tight. Why did your husband help him? Constance's hands trembled as she unfolded another letter. Because Garrett Caine saved Lawrence's life during the war. My husband was a Union Army surgeon. Garrett dragged him out of a field hospital during a Confederate raid, took a bullet in the process. Lawrence felt he owed him a blood debt. She looked directly at Eleanor, tears streaming down her face. When Garrett asked for help eliminating the man who stole his land, Lawrence convinced himself it was justice. Convinced himself that poisoning James Thornton, slowly making it look like natural fever, was somehow honorable because it was helping a friend settle an old wrong. It was murder, Marcus said flatly. It was murder, Constance agreed. And when I found these papers, when I understood what Lawrence had done, what he'd helped perpetuate based on a lie, I knew I had to come forward. Even if it destroys my husband's reputation. Even if it destroys mine. She pushed the entire satchel across the table. This is everything. The truth about the Caine family deed. Letters from Michael Caine to Garrett, spreading lies about the Thornton family. Lawrence's confession, written but never sent. Take it to the territorial court. Let them finally put this ugliness to rest. Eleanor stared at the documents, feeling the weight of 60 years of violence and revenge. Why are you doing this? She asked. You could have destroyed these papers. No one would have known. Because I love my husband, Constance said simply. And the man I loved wouldn't want his memory built on lies. He made terrible choices, but he wasn't evil. He was just lost. And I won't let his final act be perpetuating injustice. She stood gathering her skirts. I'll testify to the court if needed. I'll make sure the truth is known. After she left, Eleanor and Marcus sat in silence, processing everything they'd learned. Your grandfather didn't steal the land, Marcus finally said. His claim was legal. Patrick Caine's original deed was fraud. But Michael Caine died thinking he had been wronged, and Garrett grew up believing that lie. Eleanor's hand rested on her belly, feeling the baby kick. All this death, all this suffering, because of a mistake made 60 years ago. Oh, not a mistake, Marcus corrected gently. A deliberate fraud by Patrick Caine, and a choice by Michael and Garrett to believe the worst instead of seeking the truth. Will the court believe us? Constance Finch is the wife of one of the killers. Why would they trust her testimony? Because she's bringing evidence that condemns her own husband. That takes courage. And because Marcus tapped the documents, this isn't just testimony. This is proof, dated and signed, corroborated by multiple sources. He pulled Eleanor into his arms, careful of her swollen belly. It's over, he said. The investigation, the doubt, the fear that you'll lose everything. This land is yours, legally, morally, completely. Eleanor let herself believe it, let herself feel the relief washing through her. The baby kicked again, strong and insistent. Ours, she corrected. This land is ours. Chirp. Judge Webster reviewed Constance Finch's evidence over 3 weeks, consulting with territorial historians, land surveyors, and legal experts. In late May, he issued his ruling. Eleanor Donovan, formerly Thornton, held clear and legal title to 200 acres of Arizona territory. The Caine family claim was declared fraudulent based on a forged deed created by Michael Caine. Garrett Caine's crimes, murder, attempted murder, arson, extortion, were officially documented. His name would go down in territorial history not as a wronged landowner, but as an outlaw who'd killed innocent people based on a lie. Lawrence Finch's medical license was posthumously revoked. His reputation was destroyed. But Constance Finch was not charged with any crime. The court recognized that she'd come forward voluntarily, that she'd risked everything to ensure the truth was known. When the ruling was announced, Eleanor was 7 months pregnant, too large to ride into town. Marcus brought the news to her, waving the official court document like a victory flag. It's over, he said, sweeping her into his arms despite her bulk. You won. The ranch is yours. No one can ever take it from you. Eleanor laughed and cried simultaneously, overwhelmed by relief. That night, they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of copper and gold. What do you want to do now? Marcus asked. Now that you're finally free, Eleanor thought about it. Expand the herd, plant a bigger garden, build a new bunkhouse for hired help. She paused. Raise our children here. Make this place more than just land, make it a home. Children. Marcus raised an eyebrow. So plural, this baby is just the first. Eleanor took his hand, placing it on her belly where the baby was kicking. I want more. With you. I want to fill this house with life and laughter and messy, chaotic, beautiful normalcy. Marcus's eyes grew suspiciously bright. I'd like that too. The baby kicked hard against his palm as if agreeing. Strong, Marcus murmured. Stubborn. Like their mother, Eleanor said. Like both their parents. He kissed her temple. This kid doesn't stand a chance of being anything but tough and headstrong. As darkness fell and stars emerged overhead, Eleanor felt herself standing at a threshold. Behind her lay grief, violence, washwam. Ahead lay uncertainty, challenged the endless work of building a life from hard ground. But she wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. June arrived with heat that shimmered off the desert floor in visible waves. Eleanor, 9 months pregnant and miserable, spent most of her time in the shade of the porch, too large and uncomfortable to do much beyond direct the work others performed. Marcus had suspended his circuit, entirely stationing himself at the ranch despite protests from the territorial marshal's office. Fire me if you want, he'd told them bluntly. My wife needs me more than Arizona needs another badge. They didn't fire him, but they made it clear his career advancement had effectively ended. Marcus didn't care. He spent his days helping Samuel Morrison with ranch work, his evenings reading to Eleanor from the book of poetry he'd given her at Christmas, his nights holding her when the baby's movements kept her awake. I feel like a cow, Eleanor complained one sweltering afternoon, a beached whale. Assume, beautiful, Marcus interrupted, kissing her sweat-dampened forehead. You look beautiful. You're obligated to say that. I'm obligated to be honest, and honestly, you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Eleanor wanted to argue, but another contraction stole her breath. They'd been coming irregularly for 2 days' false labor, the midwife said. The real thing would be unmistakable. The real thing arrived at 2 in the morning on June 14th, 1885. Eleanor woke to wetness soaking the sheets and pain that bent her double. Marcus, she gasped. He was awake, instantly moving with the controlled urgency of a man who'd faced danger countless times, but never anything this terrifying. I'll get Mrs. Chen, he said, referring to the midwife in town. Don't have the baby without you. Eleanor managed through gritted teeth. I'll try my best. But Marcus was already running for his horse, riding through darkness toward town, 8 miles away. Eleanor labored alone for 45 minutes, pacing the house, gripping furniture through contractions that came faster and harder. She should be afraid, she thought distantly. Should be terrified of childbirth in this remote place with only a midwife's skill between her and death. But she wasn't afraid. She was focused, determined. This baby James's child, her child, was going to live. She would make sure of it. Mrs. Chen arrived with Marcus just as dawn broke. The tiny Chinese woman took one look at Eleanor and nodded approvingly. Strong lady, baby comes soon. You do good. She wasn't wrong. By mid-morning, as the sun climbed toward its brutal zenith, Eleanor delivered a healthy baby girl into Mrs. Chen's capable hands. The infant's first cry split the air like a benediction. Girl baby, Mrs. Chen announced, cleaning the squalling child efficiently. Strong lungs, good color. You have daughter. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, his weathered face slack with wonder. Mrs. Chen placed the wrapped bundle in Eleanor's arms, and Eleanor looked down at her daughter, James's daughter, with tears streaming down her face. She had her father's dark hair already thick, but her eyes, when they fluttered open, were pale blue, like Marcus's. No, not like Marcus's, just coincidence. Baby's eyes changed color. But as Eleanor looked at Marcus, saw him staring at the infant with naked love, she realized it didn't matter whose eyes the baby had. This child would be loved, protected, raised by the man standing in the doorway with tears on his weathered cheeks. Do you want to hold her? Eleanor asked softly. Marcus crossed the room as if walking through deep water. When Mrs. Chen placed the baby in his arms, his hands shook. She's so small, he whispered. She's perfect, Eleanor corrected. Marcus looked up, meeting her eyes. What do we name her? Eleanor had thought about this for months. Catherine, she said quietly. If that's all right with you, Catherine Eleanor Donovan. Marcus's face crumpled. He sat down hard on the bed beside Eleanor, cradling the baby against his chest, and wept. Thank you, he managed. Eleanor, thank you. Mrs. Chen bustled around them, cleaning up, issuing instructions about nursing and rest, and when to call if fever developed. But Eleanor barely heard her. She was watching Marcus with their daughter, watching him transform from weathered lawman into awed father, and feeling her heart expand to accommodate more love than she thought possible. The first weeks of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Catherine, they called her Katie, was a good baby nursing, well sleeping in stretches long enough for Eleanor to recover. But she demanded constant attention, constant care. Marcus proved surprisingly adept at fatherhood. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with Katie when she fussed, sang to her in a rough baritone that made Eleanor's heart melt. Where did you learn lullabies? She asked one night, watching him sway with the baby. My mother, Marcus said softly. She used to sing to Samuel when he was small. I didn't think I remembered, but it's all coming back. He looked down at Katie, his weathered face gentle. I never thought I'd have this, a family, a child to raise I'd given up hoping. You have it now, Eleanor said. I have everything now. But having everything meant protecting it, and in late July, protection became urgent. Samuel Morrison arrived at the ranch one morning, his usually cheerful face grim. Mrs. Donovan, Marshal, I heard something in town you should know about. They sat on the porch while Eleanor nursed Katie Samuel's news unfolding like a nightmare. There's a man asking questions. Stranger wrote in 2 days ago. He's been talking to people about the Kane gang, about what happened last fall. Specifically, he's been asking about you, Mrs. Donovan, and about the Marshal. Marcus's expression hardened. Description. Late 20s maybe, dark hair scar on his left cheek, wears his gun low. The bartender said his name is Silas Kane. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Kane as in Garrett Kane's nephew, Marcus finished grimly. His brother's son. I should have anticipated this. You think he's here for revenge? Eleanor clutched Katie tighter. I think we need to assume the worst and hope for the best. Marcus stood, already moving into martial mode. Samuel, ride to Prescott. Get word to the territorial office. I want deputies here within 2 days. I can be there by nightfall, Samuel promised. After he left, Marcus checked every weapon in the house, loaded each one, positioned them strategically. The Winchester by the front door, a pistol in the kitchen, his spare revolver in the bedroom. We've been through this before, Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice steady. We survived then. We'll survive now. You didn't have a baby then? Marcus's voice was tight. Eleanor, if something happens to me, nothing is going to happen to you. But if it does, you take Katie and you run. You don't try to fight. You don't try to be brave. You run and you keep running until you're safe. I'm not leaving you. You will if I tell you to. His hands gripped her shoulders. Catherine needs her mother more than she needs me. Promise me. Promise you'll protect her above everything else. Eleanor wanted to argue, but the fierce love in his eyes stopped her. He wasn't being dramatic. He was being a father. I promise, she whispered. Silas Kane arrived the next afternoon. He rode up to the ranch alone, hands visible, no weapons drawn. But the way he sat, his horse coiled, ready, spoke of violence waiting to be unleashed. Marcus met him in the yard, Eleanor watching from the window with Katie in her arms. Silas Kane, Marcus said flatly. I was wondering when you'd show up. Marshal Donovan. Kane's voice was younger than Eleanor expected, but carried the same cold edge as his uncle's. I've been doing some reading. Court documents, martial reports. Fascinating stuff. Your uncle was a murderer and a land thief. The courts ruled accordingly. My uncle was a man trying to reclaim his family's stolen property. Kane swung down from his horse, moving with dangerous grace. And you killed him for it. I killed him because he shot first. Funny how that works. Kane smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The lawman always gets to claim self-defense. Marcus's hand hovered near his gun. What do you want, Kane? I want to know if justice was actually served, or if you and that widow just murdered my uncle and his men to steal their land. The territorial court is full of politicians and rich men protecting their own. Kane spat in the dirt. I read about that evidence that mysteriously appeared. Dr. Finch's widow showing up with documents that perfectly exonerate the Thornton family convenient. It was the truth. It was a lie. Kane's voice rose. My grandfather didn't defraud anyone. He held legal deed to this land, and it was stolen from him by corrupt surveyors working for the territorial government. My father spent his whole life trying to get justice through legal channels. When that failed, my uncle tried to take back what was ours. Marcus's expression didn't change. Believe what you want. The courts have ruled. This conversation is over. No, Kane said softly. It's not. His hand dropped toward his gun. Marcus was faster. The shot cracked across the desert, echoing off rock formations. Silas Kane stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder, his weapon falling unfired. That was a warning, Marcus said coldly. Next one goes through your heart. Now get on your horse and ride away. Kane climbed to his feet, blood seeping between his fingers. This isn't over, Donovan. The Kane family doesn't forget, doesn't forgive. Then the Kane family can join Garrett in hell. Marcus raised his pistol. You have 10 seconds to be off this property before I arrest you for attempted murder of a federal marshal. 1, 2. Kane mounted awkwardly, cradling his wounded shoulder. You think you've won. Built yourself a nice life here playing house with a murderer's widow. But it's all built on lies and stolen land. One day the truth will come out. 3, 4. Kane wheeled his horse and galloped away, dust rising in his wake. Marcus held his position until the rider disappeared from sight. Then his shoulders sagged, the pistol dropping to his side. Eleanor emerged from the house, Katie crying in her arms, startled by the gunshot. Is he gone? She asked. For now. Marcus holstered his weapon, climbing the porch steps. But he'll be back, or he'll send others. The Kane family has a long memory. What do we do? Marcus took Katie from her arms, settling the baby against his shoulder. His hand rubbed soothing circles on her back as her crying subsided. We live, he said quietly. We build our life. We refuse to let fear control us. And we stay alert. Always. 2 days later, 3 deputy marshals arrived from Prescott. They stayed for a week patrolling the area, asking questions in town. But Silas Kane had vanished, apparently fleeing Arizona territory entirely. He's wanted in New Mexico for cattle rustling, one deputy informed Marcus. We've sent his description to all the territorial offices. If he shows his face anywhere official, he'll be arrested. But Eleanor knew, as Marcus knew, that official channels weren't the only danger. The world was full of unofficial violence revenge that didn't need warrants or badges. They would always be looking over their shoulders. Unless they chose not to. I'm done being afraid, Eleanor announced one evening in August as they sat on the porch, Katie sleeping peacefully in Marcus's arms. Eleanor, I'm serious. The Kane family took my first husband from me. They tried to take my land, my life, my peace. I won't give them power over my future. She met his eyes steadily. We've survived everything they threw at us. We're still here, and we're going to keep living, keep building, keep growing, because that's how we win, not by fighting, but by refusing to be destroyed. Marcus studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. You're right, he said. We live. We thrive. That's the best revenge. Not revenge, Eleanor corrected gently. Justice. We get to be happy. That's justice. August turned to September to October. Marcus resumed his circuit riding, though he stayed closer to home, his routes condensed to allow weekly returns instead of bi-weekly. Eleanor hired a young woman named Mary Sullivan to help with the baby and household work, freeing her time to manage ranch business. The herd grew to 30 head. The garden produced abundantly. Samuel Morrison asked to work full-time, bringing his new bride Alice to live in the renovated bunkhouse. Life acquired rhythm, routine, normalcy. And then in late November, Eleanor missed her monthly bleeding again. She told herself it was stress. Nursing sometimes delayed cycles. Her body was still recovering from Katie's birth. But when December came and went with no bleeding, when morning sickness returned with a vengeance, She could no longer deny the truth. She was pregnant again, barely 6 months after giving birth. It's too soon, she told Marcus when she finally worked up the courage to share the news. They were in bed, Katie asleep in her cradle across the room. My body hasn't recovered. The midwife said to wait at least a year between pregnancies. Marcus's hand found hers in the darkness. Are you scared? Terrified, Eleanor admitted. Women die in childbirth all the time. Having babies too close together, it's dangerous. And Katie is so young. She still needs so much attention. I don't know how I'll manage 2 infants. You won't manage alone. I'm here. Mary is here. Alice Morrison can help. We'll hire more help if needed. His thumb traced circles on her palm. And Eleanor, if you're worried about my reaction, don't be. I'm honored, humbled. Another child, another blessing. But what if, her voice broke, what if something goes wrong? What if I die and leave you with 2 babies to raise alone? Marcus pulled her against his chest, his heart beating steady beneath her ear. Then I'll raise them, he said simply. I'll love them and protect them and tell them every day about their extraordinary mother who fought outlaws and built a ranch and never backed down from anything. He kissed the top of her head. But you're not going to die. You're too stubborn for that. Despite her fear, Eleanor laughed. Stubborn. The most stubborn woman in Arizona territory. You survived Garrett Kane. You survived childbirth in the middle of nowhere. You'll survive this too. Eleanor wanted to believe him, but as winter deepened and her belly began to swell, fear gnawed at her. She'd been lucky with Katie, a relatively easy birth, no complications. What if her luck had run out? Christmas came quietly. Samuel and Maria Donovan arrived from Santa Fe bringing their own news. They were expecting their first child in spring. The house filled with laughter and celebration, momentarily driving away Eleanor's anxiety. But January brought bitter cold and morning sickness so severe Eleanor could barely keep food down. She lost weight instead of gaining it, her face gaunt, dark circles, permanent fixtures beneath her eyes. Mrs. Chen visited weekly, bringing herbal teas and stern instructions. You must eat. Baby need food to grow. You waste away, baby waste away. I'm trying, Eleanor said miserably. Everything I eat comes right back up. Then eat many small times, dry bread, broth, whatever stays down. The midwife's weathered face softened slightly. I know is hard. Second baby body tired. But you strong lady, you survive. Marcus, watching Eleanor struggle, made a decision. I'm retiring from the Marshals, he announced one evening in February. Eleanor, curled on the couch with Katie nursing at her breast, looked up in shock. What? I've been a lawman for 27 years. It's enough. You need me here full time. The ranch needs me. Our children need me. He knelt beside the couch, taking her free hand. Eleanor, I'm choosing family over duty. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing to be present instead of always riding away. Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks. You love being a marshal. I love you more. I love our children more. And I'm tired, Eleanor. Tired of violence. Tired of chasing bad men across territories. Tired of always being the one who has to fix everyone else's problems. His voice roughened. I want to fix my own life instead. Build something lasting. Watch my children grow. Grow old with you. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. He submitted his resignation in March. The territorial marshal tried to talk him out of it, but Marcus was immovable. By April, he was officially a civilian, former U.S. Marshal, Marcus Donovan, now full-time rancher and father. Eleanor watched him settle into the role with visible relief. He threw himself into ranch work with the same focused intensity he'd once applied to tracking outlaws. He expanded the cattle operation, built a new irrigation system for the gardens, started training horses to sell to the army. And he was there, every day, every moment Eleanor needed him, which was fortunate because the pregnancy grew increasingly difficult. By June, Eleanor was enormous, swollen with fluid, unable to sleep, lying down because of heartburn and shortness of breath. Mrs. Chen visited weekly, her expression growing more concerned each time. Baby very big, she said, pressing Eleanor's abdomen carefully. Or maybe, she paused, maybe 2 baby. Eleanor's heart stopped. Twins. I feel 2 heads, maybe. Mrs. Chen shrugged. We know when they come. The babies came on July 2nd, 1886, 2 months after Samuel and Maria's son was born in Santa Fe. Eleanor's labor was long and brutal, lasting nearly 24 hours. Marcus stayed with her through all of it, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement when she was certain she couldn't survive another moment. Mrs. Chen delivered the first baby, a girl, just before dawn. One daughter, she announced. 10 minutes later, a second baby emerged. One son, Mrs. Chen said, wrapping the squalling infant. You have twins, Mrs. Donovan, boy and girl. Eleanor, exhausted beyond measure, held her children with trembling arms. The girl was smaller, delicate. The boy was sturdy, loud, demanding. What do we name them? Marcus asked, his voice hoarse from hours of helpless watching. Eleanor looked at her children, these perfect, impossible miracles. Rebecca, she said, touching the girl's soft cheek, for your mother. And she looked at the boy, seeing James in his features, the dark hair, the shape of his eyes. And James, for their father. Marcus's expression flickered, pain and acceptance and love all mixed together. James and Rebecca Donovan, he said quietly. Perfect. Time jump. 5 years later, summer 1891. Eleanor stood on her porch watching her children play in the yard. Katie, now 6, was teaching 5-year-old James and Rebecca how to rope the practice dummy Marcus had built. All three were laughing, covered in dust, completely happy. Behind her, the ranch house had expanded, a new wing added to accommodate the growing family. The barn had been rebuilt twice larger each time. The herd now numbered nearly 200 head. The Donovan Ranch was one of the most prosperous in the territory. Marcus emerged from the house carrying 2-year-old Samuel, their fourth and final child, born in 1889 after a mercifully easy pregnancy and delivery. The boy had his father's pale blue eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. They're going to be all rope burns and bruises by supper, Marcus observed, settling beside Eleanor on the bench he'd built. They're learning, Eleanor said. Better to learn here where it's safe than out there where mistakes can kill you. Marcus set Samuel down to toddle after his siblings. You sound like a rancher. I am a rancher, Eleanor smiled. One of the best in Arizona territory, according to the agricultural report. It was true, the Donovan Ranch had become a model operation, innovative irrigation, careful breeding programs, sustainable land management. Eleanor had given lectures at the Territorial Agriculture Convention, written articles for farming journals, advised other women trying to make their way in a male-dominated industry. She'd found her calling not in spite of the violence and loss that had brought her here, but because of it. She'd learned that survival meant more than just enduring. It meant building something better from the ruins. I got a letter from Judge Webster, Marcus said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. He's retiring next year. Wants to know if I'd consider running for territorial judge. Eleanor turned to look at him. Would you, I don't know, it would mean traveling again, not as much as Marshal work, but still regular circuit through the territory. He watched their children playing. I'd miss a lot of moments like this. But you'd be serving justice, making sure other women don't lose their homes to corrupt land thieves, making sure other families get fair treatment. Eleanor took his hand. You retired from the Marshals because we needed you here. We don't need you the same way now. The children are older. The ranch is stable. Mary and the Morrisons can handle things when you're gone. You'd be all right with it. Eleanor thought about the terrified widow she'd been 6 years ago, convinced she couldn't survive without a man to protect her. That woman had died alongside James. The woman who'd emerged from violence and grief was stronger, not because she didn't need help, but because she'd learned to ask for it while still standing on her own feet. I'd be more than all right, she said. I'd be proud. Marcus pulled her close, kissing her temple. I'll think about it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play, until Katie called out, Papa, Mama. Watch this. She'd successfully roped the dummy. James and Rebecca cheered, and little Samuel clapped his hands in delight. Did you see? Katie ran to the porch, breathless and beaming. I did it just like you taught me. I saw, Marcus said, pride evident in his voice. Perfect form. Can I try with a real calf next time? When you're 7, Marcus promised. 1 more year of practice. Katie pouted but accepted the ruling, running back to her siblings. Eleanor watched her daughter, confident, capable, unafraid, and felt something settle in her chest. This was what she'd fought for. Not just land or justice, but the freedom for her children to grow up without fear. To learn skills without being told they were too weak or too female. to build their own futures on foundations of truth instead of lies. I've been thinking, she said slowly, about starting a women's land association. Help other widows and single women navigate the homesteading laws, defend their claims, learn ranch management. There are so many women struggling alone, facing the same threats I faced. Marcus smiled. You want to save the world. I want to save my corner of it, one widow at a time. She met his eyes. What do you think? I think you're going to change Arizona territory, one stubborn decision at a time. That evening after the children were in bed, Eleanor sat at her desk writing letters to the territorial governor proposing legislation to protect women's property rights, to the agriculture department requesting funding for women's education programs, to newspapers across the territory submitting articles about female ranch owners who were thriving despite systemic obstacles. Marcus read in the chair beside her desk, looking up occasionally to watch her work. You know what I realized today, he said during one of these pauses. What? I spent 20 years trying to make up for failing Catherine Miller, trying to save every other stubborn woman who wouldn't abandon what she loved. But I never actually succeeded until I stopped trying to save you and started loving you instead. Eleanor set down her pen, turning to face him fully. You did save me, she said quietly. Not from Garrett Kane, I'd have found a way to survive him eventually. You saved me from believing that surviving was the same as living. You taught me that I could be strong and still accept help, that I could grieve James and still love you, that I could honor the past while building a future. She crossed to where he sat, settling into his lap like they were young lovers instead of married parents of 4. You gave me everything I didn't know I needed, she murmured. A partner, a family, a life worth fighting for. Marcus's arms came around her, holding her close. You gave me redemption, purpose beyond duty, a reason to stop running from my past and start building a future. They sat like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other in the life they'd built from violence and loss. Outside, the Arizona desert stretched infinite beneath a sky full of stars. The same stars that had witnessed generations of violence over this land. The same stars that would witness whatever came next. But Eleanor wasn't afraid of what came next. Not anymore. She'd learned that endings could become beginnings, that loss could transform into strength, that the courage to stay and fight could open doors to futures undreamed of in moments of darkest despair. She'd stood on the brink, ready to surrender everything. Instead, she discovered reserves of strength she'd never known she possessed. She'd fought for her home, built a life from ruins, and found love when she thought that part of her life was finished forever. The Arizona territory had tested her in every way possible. And she'd not only survived, she'd thrived. This was her legacy. Not just the land, though, that mattered. Not just the ranch, though she'd built it into something remarkable. Her legacy was in the children sleeping peacefully upstairs. In the women she'd helped find their own strength. In the laws she'd pushed to change. In the quiet revolution of refusing to let loss define her, of choosing to live fully and fearlessly despite knowing how much could be taken away. She had chosen to stay, had chosen to fight, had chosen ultimately to live, and in doing so she'd found everything she'd never dared to hope for. As the clock struck midnight and Marcus carried her to bed, Eleanor looked back one last time at the desk covered in letters and plans and dreams. Tomorrow she'd continue the work, continue building, fighting, growing. But tonight she'd rest in the arms of the man who'd helped her discover that strength wasn't about never needing anyone. It was about knowing when to stand alone and when to let yourself be loved. They'd both been broken when they found each other, but together they'd forged something whole, something lasting, something worth every struggle it had taken to get here. Epilogue, 1895. Eleanor Donovan stood before the Arizona Territorial Legislature, one of 12 women testifying in favor of the Married Women's Property Act. At 39, she was confident, articulate, respected, a far cry from the terrified widow who'd nearly fled her ranch 11 years ago. Gentlemen, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber, I stand before you as proof that women can not only own property, but manage it successfully. The Donovan Ranch employs 15 people, produces cattle that win awards at territorial fairs, and contributes significantly to Arizona's economy. I achieved this not despite being a woman, but because the law allowed me to retain ownership after my first husband's death. She paused, letting her words settle. But I was lucky. I had resources, education, and eventually a partner who supported my autonomy. Thousands of widows and single women across this territory have none of those advantages. They lose their homes because current law treats them as children unable to manage property. They lose their livelihoods because husbands' debts transfer to them, but assets do not. They lose their futures because we, as a society, refuse to acknowledge that women are capable of the same determination and intelligence as men. She met the eyes of legislators who'd initially dismissed her, seeing some of them lean forward now actually listening. Pass this act, Eleanor concluded. Let women own property in their own names. Let them control their own earnings. Let them build legacies they can pass to their children. Give them the tools to survive when tragedy strikes instead of forcing them into poverty or hasty remarriages. Do this and you'll unleash an economic force that will transform Arizona from territory to state. The chamber erupted in applause, some enthusiastic, some polite, some conspicuously absent. But 3 months later, the Married Women's Property Act passed by a narrow margin. Eleanor received the news at home, surrounded by her family. Marcus had become a territorial judge the previous year, traveling circuit, but always home for important moments. Katie, now 10, was already talking about becoming a lawyer. The twins were 8, full of energy and mischief. Little Samuel, now 6, was the most tender-hearted of all her children. You did it, Marcus said, reading the telegram over her shoulder. You actually changed the law. We did it, Eleanor corrected. Everyone who testified, who wrote letters, who fought for this, we all did it together. That night, after the children were asleep, Eleanor stood on her porch looking out at land that had cost so much and given back more than she'd imagined possible. Somewhere out there, Garrett Kane and James Thornton and all the others who died fighting over this dirt lay buried. Their violence, their rage, their desperate need to control all of it had amounted to nothing in the end. But Eleanor's choice to live, to love, to build something bigger than herself, that had changed everything. She felt Marcus's arms come around her from behind his chin, resting on her shoulder. What are you thinking, he murmured. That I'm grateful, she said simply. For all of it. The pain that taught me strength. The loss that taught me to value what I have. The fear that taught me courage. Even the violence because it brought you to me. Grateful for being shot at. Grateful for surviving, for discovering who I really was when everything else was stripped away. She turned in his arms, looking up at the weathered face she'd come to love more than she'd thought possible. I would go through it all again if it meant ending up here with you, with our children, with this life. Marcus kissed her soft and deep, a promise renewed. Then we'll make sure it wasn't for nothing, he said. We'll keep fighting, keep building, keep showing the world what's possible when you refuse to give up. Always, Eleanor agreed. And somewhere in the Arizona darkness, the land that had seen so much death and violence settled peacefully beneath the stars, knowing that this time finally it was loved rather than coveted, protected rather than plundered, home to a family that understood its true value, not as property to be stolen or defended, but as the foundation for a future worth building. Thank you for experiencing Eleanor and Marcus's journey. May their story inspire you to face your own battles with courage and to build beauty from the ashes of loss.